Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignot, CEO of the experience agency D Flash. This is part of my 29 Days of Magic series, where I interview a phenomenal Black woman every single day for Black History Month. This week's episode, we've got the phenomenal Malika Pryor, who's the Senior Director of Educational Programs at the Detroit Historical Society. It's going to be a great conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Malika.
Hi, Laura.
How's it going?
It goes.
It's on her a bit. So as we've been chatting, I asked the same question when we get started, and I'm sure yours will be really interesting. Malika, what was your first job?
Wow. So I am the descendant of hustlers and educators, which is a really interesting kind of combination. But my first job, I think, true to my prior surname, was my own small business. I sold Christmas and Kwanzaa box cards.
Really?
Yes, I did. And I started around the tender age of like 9 or 10.
Awesome.
And I was lucky because one of my great aunts and uncles owned a Black-owned card company, and they really were sort of the forerunners locally in the city of Detroit. But I think their cards ended up selling regionally as well. But before, Hallmark had its sort of line that spoke to like Black and brown folk, and I think then eventually American Greetings got into the business. They were the folks that where you could purchase either in bulk or at the gas station or in local bookstores and spaces like that. Their cards that featured, folks that look like us. And I absolutely sold those babies at a 60-40 split every holiday season for about 6 years, middle school through high school.
Awesome. And you made a mint, I'm sure, because you're like, here you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I don't think people think about cards in quite the same way. I feel like it's one of the benefits of sort of being on the end of being a Gen Xer. Because even for like my younger brothers, there are certain elements of being analog that they didn't have the opportunity to enjoy, and like receiving a card in the mail or like passing out, the little Valentine's Day or holiday cards to your friends. Like, and that was a thing. It was special. And people loved purchasing from me, especially when I was younger, because you could flash I'm not an adolescent yet smile, look at me being so industrious. And people wanted to support that. But it was also something that was important to folks in the community to make sure they had their cards for the holidays.
I am a card fiend. And, my family, we take it really seriously with the
awesome.
cards and the holiday cards. And we have this kind of hilarious Mignot family tradition where we write little jokes on the front of the envelopes. And so before you even get to the card, there is some and it's usually an obnoxious and snarky joke about the person, and everyone
nice.
And so my parents get into it, and my brothers both, and so it's always really funny. Like Christmas morning, you look at this Christmas card, and on the front of and on the envelope of this card, it's like, well, I hope you moved. I hope you and the dog had a good time this evening, and you're just, but then when you get that card itself, is always really thoughtful, fun notes in it. And no matter where we are, no matter what's a birthday, we always write a card, and there's always some note in there that means something to folks. And I've actually gotten in the habit of saving the ones I get from my parents.
Yes.
Because it's nice to have and have that as a keepsake, because I feel like as we are so digital now, it's very rarely you get something that's actually handwritten.
True.
So it's really cool. So yeah, definitely resonated to hearing about your first gig. So okay, so you went from hustling cars at the age of 10. How
yes
right now? What do you do?
So I am a museum professional. So I work for the Detroit Historical Society. I lead a department that has 4 units, which include sales for all of the programs that live within my department, education, which is all sort of curricular-based programming, also accessibility programming. So making sure that we are providing both the services and also opportunities for folks that live on both the physical abilities, but also neuro diverse spectrum.
Wow.
Public program sort of speaks to broader, wider audiences. It also tackles the idea of new audiences, and that ranges from like Noel night. If somebody's like a Detroiter, then they know that that's one of those. It's one of those events that is your childhood, the thing that you sort of anticipate and are, contemplating all of at least the last half of November, because you can't wait for the first weekend in December. And so we're one of the historical institutions that participates in that and sort of makes it magical to, monthly series that are tackling really interesting and difficult conversations around housing equity and the historical implications, as well as the current consequences. So it's a really broad ranging body of programs that ideate out of that particular unit. And then I have a terrific small group of magicians that work in my community outreach and engagement unit, and they do the work of building out and maintaining a lot of our strategic partnerships, both at the community-based level, but also with other institutions of similar kind. And then they do the work that sounds very much akin to the name, which is going beyond the walls and just really engaging with folks and having the conversations, particularly in communities that have historically been distanced or marginalized or excluded from museum spaces, like not just Detroit Historical Society, but the institution or the industry of museums themselves. And so community outreach and engagement does a lot of that work on behalf of the society, but also helping us to more seamlessly link that work and kind of incorporate it really into the DNA of the organization. So that starts with our department and then it links out from there. And that's what I do here. I did something similar at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas for a couple of years before relocating back to the States. Yeah. So I served as the deputy there and the lead for communications, education, and development. I was the lead officer for all of those areas, and there I led also outreach and education, co-facilitated programs with our chief curator, and then was the lead for communications and our development. So that was a really amazing experience. I loved working for a national institution. I loved being in the Bahamas.
I was going to say, like, how does one get to the Bahamas to do this job?
It's funny. My husband is Bahamian.
Okay.
And we'd been married for a while, and I want to say for maybe like the first third of our journey, or from the first third of our journey, he's like, so we should think about like moving to the Bahamas. And I was like, no, actually, I don't think we should. And he was like, no, really, we should. And I responded very much like the initial response with no, not so much. And then there was just a point where he had really grown weary of the concrete jungle to which I was quite familiar and loved. And, just kind of said, listen, I need some water and I need some sand and I need to taste some fish that still has the salt in it. And
kind of important, not wrong.
Yeah, no, not wrong. And I said, well, okay, basically. And we relocated our family to Nassau, and we were there for a little over 5 years. And for a good portion of that time, I served at the gallery. But I kind of lucked up on that position because after looking for a little while and not quite finding something that I thought fit, of course, it's a much smaller market in the Bahamas, even in Nassau, which is its capital. And me being a nonprofit and really more specifically a cultural arts administrator, there are just only so many spaces. And so I really started creating experiences and opportunities around the things that that compelled me to do something. So at a certain point, I'd started a natural hair support group. I had an experience, and I don't think it's odd. I think it's probably tracks, but I do find it interesting that a lot of the work that I've done from an entrepreneurial perspective, or just kind of launching ideas and initiatives, or doing something, have almost always had something to do with either my daughters or the women that shaped me. I'm either inspired by it, or feeling again the sense of compulsion, like, okay, I must do this. And when it came to starting Nassau Naturalistas, which was an online support and resource group for women in Nassau, but there were some women that from the States, from other parts of the Caribbean, as far away as the UK, who eventually got involved. And I was sitting down. I didn't know how to cornrow, so I only had a gray black card. It wasn't a full richly black card. I couldn't cornrow.
We want to talk about my black card then. I'm gonna leave that one alone.
Listen, growing up, it was one of those things. I was like, this is the most magical thing ever when I would watch Black mothers or older sisters braid, their cousins or, daughters or younger siblings' hair. And I was just like, I don't know how y'all do that, but I can twist though. And I was watching an in-law of mine braid my daughter's hair, and she seemed angry about having to touch her hair and move through her naturally coily textured hair. And I found myself, it was corporal. I found myself, it was I had a visceral reaction, and I needed her hair to be done. It was 3/4 done. So I didn't snatch my child from from between her legs and carry her home. I let her finish, but it was so disturbing to me. And I thought to myself, I don't ever want to have to put my child in a position where she could be potentially touched by somebody that doesn't love themselves enough to be able to appreciate her. So I got on YouTube and I just kept searching until I found a video that taught me as a left dominant person how to cornrow. And so I just started doing that. And then having these conversations with other women in the Bahamas in particular, where there's just a very open conversation that employs just really undermining language around skin and hair in a way where in a lot of pockets of Black America per se, even though a lot of us are still thinking and feeling these things, we're sort of embarrassed to say it. And there isn't that sort of cultural sort of shaming that happens. You can sort of say it out loud and it's not necessarily going to be challenged. And so what I was finding, there were all these sisters that were trying to transition or return to their natural hair, and they just literally did not have the support in the spaces that meant the most to them, which were their friend spaces, or particularly the women in your family, because that is just clan is so real. I'm if only y'all knew how much of an African ancestral carryover this is. But it's very, very real. Family is so important. And so when you've got a mommy and a grandmommy and your auntie and them, and none of them are down for you, rocking your fro, it's really, really hard to do it. Because the way in which those women are thought about and are valued in that community, which is also so important, I was just really, really high. And so that's how Nassau Naturalistas came into being. And then Curly Fest Bahamas came into being, because when we were okay, well, we want to see each other in the real world. Wow. And have a conversation. And so then a festival was born out of that. And then the festival introduced me to the executive director of the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. And she's like, oh, you've done museum work? I don't think there's anybody in the country that's done exactly what you're talking about.
Oh my gosh.
Literally. And that was
time.
Absolutely. And so that's how that came into being.
Wow. So, you're just doing a few things here and there, just making magic happen wherever you go. So on top of doing what you do now, I hear you have other things that you do.
Yes. So I'm still in the business of experience creation. And I guess I can add, not guess. Let me not minimize. No. I can add curator to my list of things. I have coming out of the art realm, I have overseen folks who curate and who are curators, but I was never responsible for the meat and potatoes, if you will, of designing and really sort of getting into the anatomy of things. Usually I was managing or overseeing or, engaging questions around interpretation. But I was recently awarded a Night Art Challenge grant for a lovely $100,000 project that I just decided I was going to apply for.
As you should. Just do it.
Spring, yes. And coming back to that whole idea of being inspired by the girls and the women um, that shaped me and informed me and that I love. Um, my cousin Josephine Love, who was a principal founder of Your Heritage House, and it was both a school and museum of art for young people, as well as my grandmother Del Pryor, who's the founder of Del Pryor Galleries, which in its earlier iterations also operated as Cluttered Corners, which was, excuse me, where she primarily dealt in antiques, but always art. And just these women's impact on the city of Detroit as prototypes for the city's modern midtown, of points of accessibility and amplification, particularly for Black and Brown folk, for my grandmother as a contemporary arts gallerist, like as a Black woman who's a contemporary arts gallerist, like that first and foremost is not a super common thing, even right now in 2020. But the fact that she took on art as early as the late 70s is pretty notable. And for my cousin, opening a school of art in the middle of the cultural center in like the late 60s, both of them doing it in the second half of their lives in their 40s and 50s, sort of launching these businesses as entrepreneurs, and then like just kind of quietly just setting things on fire, just shifting atmosphere, just moving things and moving people and putting them in a position to really do fantastic things. And as a result, have helped thrust other folks into the limelight, even where they may not have necessarily found themselves. And so I was awarded this grant. So as long as I can make the other money, the hustle is kicking into gear. I receive an award from them of $50,000, and it's in partnership with the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, where the exhibition will go up in January 2021. And then there will be a body of programs inspired by the work of Josephine Love at Your Heritage House, as well as some fun intersectional contemporary art meets jazz music, because those are the two things that my grandmother loved most, and where she just kind of made some magical things happen in a gallery space that people would have never expected to see in the city of Detroit. They would have expected to see it in Manhattan or Toronto or London, but they wouldn't have expected to see it in Detroit. And she just did great things in that space.
Awesome. That's so
So I get.
That's really awesome. I mean, like it's so interesting because I think there's so many stories that need to be told and having the right kind of curators like yourself to tell them is just so paramount, because the history is endless of success and challenges. So I'm super excited.
Yes.
Well, when will this kind of come together and open?
So the opening is in late January 2021, which is super apropos because it will also be my grandmother's 93rd birthday. She is still very much alive and kicking it hardcore, still curating work for in exhibitions for others, although she doesn't have her brick and mortar anymore. So that's the idea. We'll be opening around her birthday, and it will run through the middle of May. So through Black History Month, through Women's History Month. So I'm just really, really excited about that. It's going to be in one of the primary temporary gallery spaces at the Wright. So it's just a very apropos space as well. It's a true exhibition gallery space. So it gives me the latitude to really do something that's truly, truly special. So I'm already working with the curatorial team over there to really build out what it is that I want to see. And I have a small cadre of consiglieres, Jednas, who are making life easier for me by just, providing that guidance and support. Because, Black women save Black women every single day.
Every single day.
And so I have just these amazing humans that are by my side and encouraging me and, sharing both experience, but also just like a wealth of resources to make the journey that much easier.
Well, it's that's going to be pretty damn incredible, and I can't wait to see more. So that when it comes together, So, I mean, what's some of your advice for Black women getting involved in curation, becoming curators, and going into the museum world? Because obviously, it's a very difficult. It's not something you can easily walk into, especially if you're a Black woman. So, what was some advice you could give?
Well, the thing that's really interesting about museums, so like I'm actually a lawyer by trade, so it's kind of funny because I ended up stumbling into museum work, and I was fortunate because I started at the Charles H. Wright Museum. There are only, of course, so many first voice institutions. There are clearly far more that speak to mainstream experiences, and you're not wrong. It's not the easiest space. So I was fortunate in that my initial introduction to the museum world specifically, although I had done like community-based nonprofit work and some smaller cultural arts, sort of youth education work. I was fortunate in that I was able to get started in museums specifically via the Charles H. Wright, and it has such a long legacy as one of the first museums of African American history, the largest of its kind until DC opened. That carried a level of cachet. However, what I am seeing, particularly for young folk, if you're thinking about making a career transition, I think it's a little bit different. But what we are seeing right now at this moment is a realization, at least for any cultural institution that intends to survive and thrive into the future, that they don't have a choice, just by the statistics, to continue to look inside of the museums the way that they do. They know that in order to be successful, they have to start being more inclusive and building out the pipelines that actually facilitate opportunity. So one of the things that I say to young people, if you're interested in going into the cultural arts realm, one, bring your entrepreneurial spirit and cap with you. Think about how you can create opportunities, link up and plug into networks. For Black women, I think that culturally we're often encouraged to keep your nose down, work hard, you'll do great. No, because the moment you stop being a magical Negro, in many instances, you become threatening to folks. And if you don't have a network, if you don't have safe space, if you aren't getting sort of that internal intel that helps you to navigate where you are and to navigate the microaggressions, to navigate the gaslighting, which certainly isn't unique to cultural arts, but does have a language of its own, I think, in a way for cultural arts institutions. It can be very hard. It can be discouraging. So doing that early, there are a number of expanding museum studies programs that are coming into being, both at historically Black colleges and universities, but also ones that exist at, predominantly white institutions. So if it's something that you think you really, really, really want to do, that's a space, but you don't necessarily have to do that in order to get into it. I think what's most important is to engage your networks early, apply for those fellowships and those internships that get you the real world and real life experience that you need. A lot of them at this moment, coming back to that whole, we're not going to survive if we don't start having like real conversations with Black and brown folk. From an internal perspective, are specifically aimed and geared towards young Black and brown museum professionals. So there are more opportunities certainly now than there ever were like a decade ago when I first got into the museum world. I think for folks who might be looking to transition, if you're like doing something else professionally and you're thinking to yourself, I think I want to be in museums. Look at the positions where there's the greatest overlay, I would say, for transferable skills. And think about whether or not that's something that you really want to do, because I think museums can sometimes look kind of sexy. But it's a grind. It's a grind. I don't care how big the institution is, unless you're mammoth in the way like a Met is. And even then, depending on the level at which you're working, you're almost inevitably wearing more than just one hat, coming back to that whole entrepreneurial piece. So know that if this is something that you're interested in doing, think about this space that's transferable. Think about whether or not the outcomes of that work is something that you are interested in creating, because we're very deadline oriented, very deadline driven, and outcomes driven. I know coming out of programs, we're very deadline driven. Curatorial in some ways has a little bit more room. I mean, of course, there is eventually the hard deadline, but you may spend 2 years building out an exhibition. And so that, that facilitates, some ebb and flow in a way that when you got to have that program every month, there isn't the same flexibility, or that program every week, there isn't that same flexibility. But think about where your transferable skills are, because there are a lot of institutions, because they are thinking about like, how do we innovate? How can we be different? How can we be the cool one? How can we be the one that lasts? That are looking beyond traditional museum professionals to find, the person that can make magic for them. So there's also a greater, I think, openness. I can't say it's like incredibly open, but there's certainly more openness in this moment in time. And not surprisingly, a lot of it is the result of protest. Folks, particularly artists and creators, who are like, wait a minute, what in the world do you think this is? This mausoleum and this ode to empire, decolonize this space. And you can't just put up a pretty picture of like a Black woman or a controversial, image that's produced by a Black woman and think that that means representation. You have to have people that are making decisions on the other side and that are interpreting this work, that are collecting this work, that are archiving this work, that are deciding what gets to be remembered and what gets to become a part of our collective cultural archive. So that has also definitely rocked museums, both in the States, but quite honestly, across the entire world. Like Black and brown folks just being like, basically, nope. You've got to do something different. And that's been a wake-up call to museums as well.
Good. So what would you tell 25-year-old Malika?
Oh, that's a good one. Girl, you about to have 3 more kids.
Okay, good.
I think I would tell her, be as ambitious as you actually are. I think if there's anything I would say, because I coming back to like there not being a whole lot of folks that look like us in the museum world, I didn't know how to navigate it. So I learned, via mistakes, ups and downs, being fired and then being called back in to do contract work because there was nobody that had the same way of looking at things that I did and could get it done in the time that folks needed it. But I learned hard heads make for soft behinds. But I don't even know if I was hard headed. I just really didn't have the guidance. There wasn't anybody there that was like, yo, this is how you play this game. This is how you do this. This is how you navigate. This is how you maneuver. This is how you sustain. And I have it oddly enough, I have it a little bit more now. But part of that is because I sort of figured it out. But I think that if I could say anything to her, I would say, be as ambitious as you are. At 25, I just graduated from law school. I had a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old. And I wasn't necessarily focusing inwardly as much as I think knowing what I know now, I would have, because you've got to preserve some of yourself.
Exactly.
Up front.
So. I would definitely agree. That's I like the advice there. And along the way, you've had probably a whole host of challenges. What's been your kind of way to kind of help you see through those challenges along the way? Like what's been the thing that you like had to face, and then how have you overcome it?
Sure. So there are, any number of things. I think not so much from a career perspective, but certainly from a very like human place point. There was a time in between my number 3 and my number 4. Children.
Small people.
Yeah. Even though it's crazy because my eldest is going to be 18 in a month, which is just wild to me.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she's a freshman at the College for Creative Studies, and I'm like super proud of her. But I can't say it too much because then they get a little too excited, start feeling themselves a little too much. So you got to still ask questions. You feel me?
Of course, yes.
But in between my 3 and my 4, I had 3 miscarriages,
Wow.
and at that point, I already had obviously 3 children, and there was a kind of, and this might even sound odd, there was a level of confidence, maybe almost hubris, that I just had this expectation that my body was going to do this thing. I was going to carry a baby to term. It was going to be successful. It was going to be pretty and healthy and smart and do all of the things that my 3 children had previously done. I had all natural births. My first was in hospital, but it was in like an alternative birth care unit, right? So the natural birth, which is so odd, like the natural birth would be alternative, but that's neither here nor there. And then my second and third were home births. So I was like, I'm a birth champion in this piece. I know how to do this. I got this. And it was devastating when I had my first miscarriage. And I racked my brain trying to figure out what in the world I'd done, not being fully willing or able to acknowledge and recognize and own that it might be that I just really didn't have that power. Like I didn't have that juice. It wasn't even about me at all. It was about something far bigger and greater than me, which was really the essence of life. And I'm not in charge of that. And then after my second and then my third, and those happened back to back,
Oh my God.
I really had to take a moment and just sort of sit with the reality and require myself not to judge, not to make a decision. I grew up as like a super analytical person. It's just a part of who I am. I mean, like I was like the kid in elementary school. I was like, why would you do that? Because now you're not going to get candy and nobody's going to let you go on the field trips. So always my mind was working. I'm like, I'd rather watch you get in trouble and figure out what not to do than try that for myself. I prefer to think ahead and to contemplate things. And so that made me somebody that thought about things a lot. I never wanted to make a mistake twice. But the thing about miscarriage is you don't spontaneous, or spontaneous abortion, as they refer to them, you don't make that happen. You can't decide, the if and when and the where. And so it required me to rethink some things. Not that I'm not thoughtful, not that I don't contemplate, not that I, prefer to do the very best that I can from the very beginning, but it did require me to just sort of sit with myself and own the fact that there are things that are just much bigger than me. And it's better, again, not that we shouldn't think about things, but to think about them from the perspective of what is my takeaway, not how am I judging. And miscarriage helped me to do that, to just accept and embrace that something changed, that it was outside of my control, that it wasn't necessarily about me at all, but that I had an opportunity to be able to learn and take something away. And that's helped me to have a much healthier internal relationship with myself, so that as opposed to being like, oh, how did you manage to do that, Malika? It's like, okay, well, what happened? Are you an actor? Okay, you are. So then what is it that you can extract from that? Get granular with it, and then let it go and move on, because you could live in that space and running through your head however long. It isn't going to change the fact that it's already occurred. Even if it's all your fault, it's not going to change it. Own it, be okay with it, embrace what it is, learn the lesson, and move on. And that has been an incredible gift to me, because being a mother just alone of children who are anywhere from 1 to 17, I'm like, I don't know how many different mistakes did I make today. But just being able to look at it for what it is and be okay with it. Like, even if it's not awesome, like that, it's okay. It's going to be okay. There's going to be a tomorrow. And even if it matters, it will still be okay.
Wow. That's so beautiful and powerful. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you will have helped a lot of people more than you ever even know by sharing that truth. So I really appreciate you giving that perspective. So speaking of which,
Yes.
what do you do for self-care because, Black women are tired. We got a lot to do. You have 5 kids and about 18 jobs. What do you do for the weekend? And do them all beautifully. But like, what's the thing you do for yourself? Like, is it a glass of red wine on a Friday? Is it going for a run? Is it just watching The Housewives? Like, how do you sort of like take a moment for yourself?
So I will say I was the worst at intentional self-care. Like I'd wait until I felt like I was gonna like shoot somebody. I probably should say that on a podcast. I promise officers I wasn't actually going to do it. But I would wait until I was just at that point where I was at the break before I would make a decision that I was going to do something for myself. And then it would be in like some sort of ridiculous, dramatic fashion. And at a certain point I was like, that's so silly. Why do you keep waiting until you're at a point where like, and I think I was like reading an article or it was like a meme or something on Facebook, because of course every meme on Facebook is true. And it said something about like, instead of trying to get away from your life, make your life something that you want to live every day. And I was like, well, dang, that's touche. It kind of like, it caught me in a particular kind of moment. And so it really just sort of shed light on me beginning to reconsider. And so I will be honest, that is an area where like my mark would be like NI needs improvement. But there are a couple of things that I've made a commitment to. One is to shed frequently, to not let things build up. If it's something that's important enough to me, address it. Don't let it sit. Don't let it fester. And that's a kind of self-care for me, just because in part because there's so many people whose lives I actually navigate and help to curate. So I guess I have been a curator for a really long time. In that sense, but also because having those different roles can be overwhelming. It's important to be able to give myself the opportunity to reflect and to put things in perspective. So quiet time is something that I value. I try and get like, even if it's just a couple of minutes every day, to just be quiet with myself, whether I meditate, whether I pray, whether I, kind of run back the day and figure out, okay, maybe you were hitting a ceiling. What's the least important thing right now? Get rid of that immediately. Like, don't apologize. You ain't even got to tell nobody. Like, you can let them know when you get ready. Move that off the plate and do it unapologetically, because if you're gone tomorrow, one, nobody's going to care about that thing anyway, or two, somebody else is going to do it anyway. So to put it to the side and giving myself permission to do that. So I try to create a little bit of quiet time, and I have recommitted in 2020 to traveling again. I love traveling. And so I've just decided, I'm like, every year, whether it's you and me, boo, or not you, I'm going somewhere.
Going somewhere, somehow.
Going somewhere, and I'm putting a stamp in that passport, ideally. So that's something else that I've just committed myself to, at least once a year, going and seeing somewhere.
Awesome. That's so key. And I think little bits a day, every day, come in super duper handy, because it adds up, because you sort of fill the tank for yourself.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So as part of 29 Days of Magic, I've added this new piece to the show where if my guest has a give or an ask, and it could be anything, it could be like just asking if anyone has connections, or it could be like or just a give to the universe, and like, I wish for people listening to do XYZ. So what would your give and or ask be?
Oh, my ask, my wish, my verdant hope and prayer would be that Black men and women make internal commitments to have nuanced conversations about any of the things. And part of what inspires that is I spend like some time on social media. I don't have a huge presence because I'm like, manage what? Like, I can barely manage putting on the right shoes sometimes. So I'm not trying. I got like 2 accounts. But with the recent, with the tragic death of Kobe Bryant, and the whole fiasco that I won't even bother, getting into, there have just been all these conversations, and there have been these moments where it's like this really oh, that's beautiful. And then we just like descended into Hades. And I'm like,
Right.
but you don't even know Gail though.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Like, but you know this woman. Like you like Snoop doesn't know you exist, but you know this human being. Like y'all are cousins, and we're just kind of like tearing ourselves apart. And what, of course, that tells me is that that Gail and Snoop or whomever, or Kobe or whomever, like fill in the blank, or whatever, whomever it is, are proxies for these multi-generational, multilateral questions that we are kind of sort of asking, but often are engaging in bits and in bytes on social media, as opposed to giving ourselves permission to really unpack um, the double victimization of white supremacist patriarchal systems, and even where we think of ourselves as being partial beneficiaries of whatever that looks like, or as victimized. Actually, like, it's all problematic, and it doesn't actually in the end serve any of us. And so how do we look at what that means for us, and then how we have then been complicit without, again, coming back to just that idea, like, even if it matters, it can be okay if we do it without judgment, and instead with this idea that at least there's the opportunity for redemption if we can develop some understanding. Because there are things that, if we're not truly looking and observing and talking through and engaging, we really don't know and we really don't understand. And I would just, it is my hope and my wish, because we cannot afford to throw each other away. And I find that more and more frequently, like, we're opting in for throwing out.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, who gonna be there in a minute?
Exactly. Like, if you toss away your paddle before you get across the river, how are you going to get across the river?
How are you going to get across the river?
So, give it a rest. You would perfect, absolutely perfect. I am that because actually you're the first person to bring that up and encapsulate it in a beautifully curated way. So thank you, Malika.
Thank you.
It has been a delight to have you on this show. You just a font of information and energy and spirit, and I'm honored to have you on this show. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm a reflection of you. It was an honor and pleasure to do this. I'm so appreciative that you considered me and had me on. So I'm just like, I'm special, Laura. Have me on her podcast.
Exactly. You were part of the magic of 29 days.
Hey.
But we'll absolutely put information in our show notes about how people can come check out your museum in Detroit, and then what you've got coming on in 2021.
Yes.
Connect with you, because I'm sure folks, if you're in the Detroit area, should come see you. And jot down your calendar for next year when you're going to also launch your next project in honor of your grandmother, which is going to be pretty phenomenal.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And that is our show.